My wife was secretly cheating on me with my best friend. She lied about everything, and when I found out, she tried to fix it. But it was a Saturday afternoon. Nothing out of the ordinary. Ashley had taken our son, Kyle, to her mom's for the day, so I figured I'd get some stuff done around the house. I'd been meaning to fix the leaky kitchen faucet for weeks, but as usual, I procrastinated until there was no way to ignore it anymore. I grabbed my toolbox from the garage and got to work under the sink. Wrenches, pipes, washers. I wasn't exactly a handyman, but I could handle small things like this. I had the kitchen radio on, and as I twisted the final bolt, I heard the unmistakable ping of a notification. It wasn't my phone. I glanced around, realizing the sound had come from Ashley's tablet on the counter. She never left her electronics lying around, especially unlocked. Curious, I stood up and wiped my hands on a towel before walking over to it. There it was. A new message popped up on the screen. It was from someone named Jay. The preview showed just a snippet. "Can't wait to see you again tonight." My stomach dropped. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have put the tablet down and walked away. But I couldn't. My hand moved on its own, tapping the message. What I found turned my world upside down. The chat was filled with intimate conversations, plans to meet up, and references to the fun we had last week. My hands started shaking as I scrolled, reading things that no husband should ever have to read about his wife. The man's name was Jake, our family friend, the guy I played basketball with every other weekend. I felt like I was punched in the gut. My heart raced. My mind went blank. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Was this real? Could Ashley really be cheating on me with Jake? I backed away from the tablet like it was on fire, my heart pounding in my chest. What was I supposed to do with this? Ashley would be home in a few hours, and I had no idea how to even begin to confront her. I thought we were happy. I thought our marriage was solid. But now, everything I believed felt like a lie. After discovering those texts on Ashley's tablet, I was a wreck for the rest of the day. My mind kept spiraling, replaying every conversation, every moment I had shared with her over the years. I didn't know what to do or how to act when she got home. Should I confront her? Pretend nothing was wrong? The hours crawled by until I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My stomach tightened. Kyle came running through the door first, his smile wide, his innocence cutting through my fog of confusion. "Hey, Dad!" he shouted, before heading to the living room to play. Then Ashley walked in, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey, babe," she said, setting her purse down on the counter like nothing was out of the ordinary. "How was your day?" It took every ounce of strength I had not to show that I knew. "Fine," I muttered, forcing a smile. "Just worked on that leaky faucet." I couldn't look her in the eyes for too long. I was afraid she'd see the storm brewing inside me. We made small talk through dinner, but my mind was elsewhere. Every laugh she gave, every glance she threw my way, felt like a betrayal. I had to get out of the room. After dinner, I retreated to the garage, pretending I had something to fix. I just needed space. Space to think. And that's when it happened. While I was in the garage, I heard a strange sound coming from the living room. At first, I thought it was Kyle playing with some new gadget. But when I walked back into the house, I realized it was coming from the smart speaker on the kitchen counter. The voice command must have accidentally triggered it. I could hear Ashley's voice coming from the speaker, but it wasn't anything recent. The smart speaker had activated a recording of her, talking to someone on the phone. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard the words that made my blood run cold. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible, Jake. I wish we could do it more often." My legs almost gave out. The recording continued, her voice soft and sultry, saying things I never imagined she'd say to anyone else. And the worst part, I had no idea this conversation had been recorded. It was like the universe was mocking me, throwing the truth in my face. She hadn't even realized the smart speaker had picked it up, but I heard it, loud and clear. I stood there, frozen, as the recording finished. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My world had just collapsed in on itself, and I didn't know how to pull myself out. The room felt like it was spinning as the last words of the recording echoed in my head. I turned toward the hallway, half expecting Ashley to walk in and ask what I was doing. But she was still in the living room with Kyle, laughing at something on TV, completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. My hands were shaking, but I had to pull it together. I quickly walked over to the smart speaker and tapped the button to stop it from playing any more recordings. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my thoughts were racing. Part of me wanted to march into the living room and confront her right then and there. But how could I explain that I found out through the speaker? It felt ridiculous. I couldn't let her know what I'd heard, not yet. I needed more time to figure out what I was going to do. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, staring at the speaker like it had betrayed me, but in reality, it had done the opposite. It had revealed the truth I hadn't been able to see. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, then walked into the living room. Ashley glanced up at me with a smile, the same smile I used to love. Now, it just felt like a mask she wore to hide who she really was. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to sound normal. Just, thinking about work stuff." "Oh, okay," she said, shrugging as she turned back to the TV. She didn't have a clue that her whole facade had crumbled in front of me. She was still pretending, like everything was fine. But I knew better now. As I sat down beside her and Kyle, pretending to watch the show they were laughing at, I couldn't help but feel like I was in some twisted game. She was laughing, joking, acting like the loving wife I thought she was. But her words from that recording kept playing over and over in my head. "Last night was incredible, Jake." I clenched my fists, trying to stop the anger from boiling over. I needed to keep it together for Kyle's sake. He didn't deserve to see his dad unravel right in front of him. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep this bottled up forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to confront Ashley. And when I did, everything would change. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ashley's voice from that recording, replaying her conversation with Jake over and over in my head. I turned from side to side, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the truth crushing down on me. Beside me, Ashley was sound asleep, completely unaware that I knew about her betrayal. She looked so peaceful, like nothing was wrong, but it only made the pain sharper. How could she lie next to me every night, knowing what she was doing behind my back? The bed, our home, it felt like a lie. At some point, I gave up trying to sleep and slipped out of bed quietly. I didn't want to wake her. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat at the dining table, just staring at the bottle. It felt like I was living in someone else's life, not my own. Like this couldn't actually be happening to me. But it was. And now I had to figure out what to do next. I thought about Kyle. How was I supposed to explain this to him? He idolized his mom, thought the world of her. What would this do to him if I tore our family apart? The thought of hurting him made my chest tighten. But I couldn't live like this either, pretending I didn't know. The lies, the betrayal. I could already feel them poisoning everything. By the time the sun started creeping through the windows, I hadn't made any decisions. I had been sitting there for hours, lost in thought, not knowing what my next move was. Ashley woke up, walking into the kitchen, yawning and stretching, like any other normal morning. She smiled at me as she poured her coffee. "You're up early," she said, still oblivious. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Just couldn't sleep." "Something on your mind?" I almost laughed at the irony of her question, but instead, I shook my head. "Nah, just work." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "You work too hard, you know that." If only she knew. As I watched her go about her morning routine, acting like everything was fine, I realized just how good she was at lying. It wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate, careful. She was hiding this affair so well, right under my nose, and if it weren't for that accidental recording, I might have never known. That thought made my decision clearer. I wasn't going to rush into confrontation. Not yet. I needed more information. I needed to know how deep this went, how long it had been happening, and why. Then, when the time was right, I'd make sure there was no room for her to lie her way out. I didn't know how long I could keep up this charade, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to be the fool in this story. The next few days were a strange dance of pretending everything was normal while my mind spun in 1,000 directions. I went to work, came home, played with Kyle, and acted like the loving husband I'd always been. But beneath that, I was watching Ashley's every move, every glance at her phone, every time she stepped out for errands. Was she texting Jake? Planning their next meeting? I knew I couldn't confront her without more evidence. If I came at her too soon, she'd lie her way out, and I wasn't going to give her that chance. So, I did something I never imagined I would. I installed a GPS tracker on her car. Just a small device, easy to set up, and impossible for her to notice. It felt wrong, but in my mind, she had already crossed the line. I was just leveling the playing field. For a few days, the tracker didn't show anything unusual. She went to work, came home, stayed with Kyle in the evenings. There was a part of me that almost started to doubt everything, to think maybe it was all in my head. Maybe she had ended it, or maybe it wasn't as serious as I feared. But then Friday came, and my phone buzzed with a notification. The tracker showed her car parked at a hotel across town, a place she had no reason to be. My heart dropped. I stared at the map, willing it to be a mistake, but it wasn't. She hadn't mentioned anything about going out. This wasn't work-related. I sat there for a moment, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. I knew, deep down, what I'd find if I went there. She was meeting him. It was the proof I needed, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. That was it. My suspicions were no longer just suspicions. Now I had facts, and I was done playing dumb. But before confronting her, I needed more. I couldn't just walk in with accusations. If she was at that hotel with Jake, I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of. With a shaky breath, I stood up, grabbed my car keys, and headed for the door. I drove to the hotel in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every mile. My mind raced with images of what I might walk in on, of Ashley with Jake. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I knew I couldn't just sit at home while she was with him. As I pulled into a hotel parking lot, I saw her car immediately. There it was, parked discreetly in the back. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in my car, staring at her vehicle, trying to steady my breathing. I knew this was it. No turning back. I thought about storming inside, confronting them both, but I stopped myself. I needed proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away. If I just walked in now, they could deny everything. I needed to catch them in the act. I sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking. Then it hit me, the front desk. I could get the room number from there, and once I knew where they were, I could figure out my next move. I wasn't thinking straight, but I was desperate. My mind was clouded with anger and betrayal. I walked into the lobby, trying to look calm, like I belonged there. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I approached the desk. "Hi, I'm supposed to meet someone here, but I forgot the room number," I said, doing my best to sound casual. The receptionist didn't even blink. "What's the name?" "Oh, Ashley Coleman." She typed for a moment, then nodded. "Room 212. I thanked her and walked away, my heart hammering in my chest. Room 212. The room where everything I had known about my life, my marriage, was being ripped apart. I took the elevator to the second floor, my mind spinning. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. When I reached the door, I stood there for what felt like an eternity. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to hear anything, voices, movement, something that would confirm what I already knew. And then I heard it, a muffled laugh, Ashley's laugh, followed by a man's voice. "Jake." The knot in my stomach tightened, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. There was no denying it anymore. They were in there together. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped. I couldn't do this. Not like this. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation in a hotel hallway. I needed to be smart, to gather proof. So instead of knocking, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the room number, her car, and everything I could to document what I'd found. Then, I turned around and walked away, leaving them behind the door, completely unaware that their secret was about to come crashing down. I walked out of the hotel, feeling like I had left a part of myself behind in that hallway. I got into my car, my mind buzzing, my hands still trembling. The proof I had was solid enough. Photos of the room number, Ashley's car, and the unmistakable sound of their voices. But the real confrontation was still ahead of me. I sat there in the parking lot for a few minutes, staring at my phone. I thought about texting her, something simple like, "Where are you?" But what good would that do? She'd lie. I knew she'd lie, just like she had been lying for who knows how long. My anger bubbled to the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to be strategic. I couldn't go home like nothing had happened. I couldn't sit through another evening pretending that everything was okay. I had to confront her. But I wasn't ready for a face-to-face showdown yet. So I drove. I didn't even know where I was going, but I needed to clear my head. I ended up at a small park a few miles from the hotel. I parked the car and sat on a bench, staring at the trees, trying to make sense of everything. How had it come to this? How had we gone from being a happy family to this? The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. It was the lies, the deception. How could she look me in the eye every day and pretend like nothing was happening? I pulled out my phone again and opened the photos I'd taken. There was her car, parked neatly in the back of the hotel lot. And then, the picture of room 212. The evidence was right there, staring me in the face. I scrolled through my contacts and hovered over her name. My thumb hesitated over the call button. Should I call her now? Confront her while she was still with him? My heart raced at the thought, but something held me back. I didn't want to give her the chance to deny it, to spin some story that would confuse me all over again. Instead, I texted her, "Hey, where are you?" It was simple enough, not accusing, just curious. A few minutes passed, and I saw the familiar dots indicating she was typing. At the grocery store. Do we need anything else? The lie hit me like a punch to the gut. She didn't even hesitate. She was still lying, still pretending everything was fine, even while she was with him. I clenched my phone, anger building inside me. I was done playing along with her game. It was time to face the truth head on, but I needed to be smart about it. When she got home, I'd have everything ready. I wasn't going to just accuse her. I was going to show her the proof. And when I did, there would be no way out for her. By the time I got home, I had already made up my mind. Tonight was the night. I wasn't going to wait any longer or give her more time to lie. The proof I had was enough. Pictures of her car at the hotel, the room number, her fake grocery store text. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. She was cheating, and I wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. I went inside and started pacing, trying to keep myself calm. Kyle was in the living room, watching his favorite cartoon, completely unaware of the storm brewing in our family. I watched him for a moment, feeling the familiar twist in my gut. How was I supposed to explain this to him when the time came? How would this change everything for him? But before I could think too much about it, the door opened and Ashley walked in. She had a couple of grocery bags in her hands, like she was really coming back from the store. She smiled at me, completely at ease. "Hey, babe. I picked up some things for dinner," she said, walking past me into the kitchen, setting the bags down on the counter. I stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering how she could act so normal, so casual, after what she'd just done. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I pushed it down. I couldn't lose control, not yet. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up from unpacking the groceries, her expression calm, like she had nothing to hide. I told you. I was at the store. Got everything we need for the week. The lie hit me harder this time because I knew. I knew exactly where she had been. I nodded slowly, playing along for just a little longer. You sure? You didn't stop anywhere else. She paused, glancing up at me with a confused look. No, why? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the photos and held it up for her to see. Her eyes widened as she looked at the screen, at the picture of her car parked outside the hotel. Then, the photo of room 212. She blinked, and for a moment, it looked like she was trying to process what she was seeing. I know, Ashley, I said, my voice low but firm. I know you weren't at the grocery store. I know you've been lying to me. Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that she had been caught. She looked from the phone back to me, her expression shifting from shock to something else, something like fear. She started, but I cut her off. Don't even try to lie to me again. I heard you with Jake. I know what you've been doing behind my back. There was a long silence. She stared at me, frozen, as if trying to find some way out of the situation. But there was no way out, not this time. The truth was right there, staring her in the face. For a moment, Ashley just stood there, frozen, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. I could see her mind racing, trying to piece together a way to explain this away. But she knew, just as well as I did, that there was no escape this time. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. Even now, after all the evidence in front of her, she was still going to lie. Really, Ashley? You're going to tell me it's not what it looks like? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice trembling. Jake, it just got out of hand. I was lonely, and... Lonely, I interrupted, my anger bubbling up again. Lonely? We have a family, Ashley. I've been right here, and you were sneaking around with Jake. My friend. She flinched at that, and I saw the guilt flash across her face. I'm sorry, she whispered, wiping at her tears. I didn't know how to stop. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, incredulous. You think that makes it better? You've been lying to me for months, Ashley. She looked down at the floor, silent, her tears falling freely now. For the first time, she didn't have anything to say. No excuses, no justifications. Just guilt and regret. But I wasn't ready to feel sorry for her yet. The betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. And as I looked at her standing there, broken and exposed, I realized something. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. I trusted you, I said, my voice quieter now, the anger giving way to something deeper. Hurt. I trusted you, and you threw it all away. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm sorry. But sorry wasn't going to fix this. It wasn't going to undo the months of lies, the countless nights where she had chosen someone else over me. The cracks in our marriage had become too deep, and now I wasn't sure if they could ever be repaired. I turned away from her, my chest tightening with the weight of it all. I need time, Ashley. I don't know what happens next, but right now I just need space. She didn't say anything, didn't try to stop me as I walked out of the room. Maybe she knew, deep down, that this time, there were no words that could make it right. I spent the next few hours in my car, parked at the edge of town near the lake. It was one of those spots I used to go to when I needed to clear my head. Tonight, it felt like the only place I could breathe. The night air was cool, and the quiet was almost unnerving. My mind replayed the conversation with Ashley over and over, like a broken record. Her words, her tears, the way she crumbled in front of me. It should have made me feel something. But all I felt was emptiness. I didn't text her. She didn't call. The silence between us hung heavy, like a wall neither of us knew how to break down. I knew she was at home, probably crying, probably wondering if there was any way to fix this. But I didn't know if I wanted it to be fixed. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't know her. The woman who'd promised me forever had become a stranger who had lied to my face, who had been sneaking around behind my back with someone I considered a friend. And that betrayal, it cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I stared out at the water, trying to sort through the mess of emotions in my head. Part of me wanted to go back, to hear her explain more, to understand why she did what she did. But another part of me knew that nothing she said would change the fact that she had chosen him over me, over us. After a while, I started driving again, not toward home, but just driving. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere felt better than facing the shattered pieces of my marriage. It was late when I finally pulled into our driveway. The house was dark, except for a small light on in the living room. I hesitated before going inside, bracing myself for whatever came next. As I stepped into the house, I saw Ashley sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a second, it felt like we were both too tired to fight anymore. "I didn't think you'd come back tonight," she whispered. I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. I had no answers. I didn't know if I'd come back to stay or if I'd come back to end things. All I knew was that the silence between us couldn't last much longer. I needed space. I finally said, my voice quiet. She nodded, wiping at her face. "I understand." But did she? Did she really understand what she had done? The way she had ripped apart the life we had built together, without any warning, without any chance for me to stop it? I didn't know if she could ever really understand. "I don't know what to do, Ashley," I said, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying again. But instead, she just looked down at the floor. I don't know if you should forgive me," she whispered. We stood there in that painful silence, both of us lost in our own guilt, anger, and regret. The truth was, forgiveness wasn't something that would come easily. If it ever came at all, the silence in the room felt suffocating, heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Ashley stayed curled on the couch, her face streaked with dried tears. I stood by the door, my mind buzzing, trying to make sense of what was left of us. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to leave?" Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead. In the back of my mind, I'd wondered what would happen after this, but hearing her ask it made it feel real. Our marriage, our home, everything was hanging by a thread, and I didn't know what to say. "I don't know," I replied, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "I don't know what I want right now." She nodded, her hands fidgeting in her lap, as if she didn't know what to do with them. "I can stay with my mom for a while, give you space to figure things out." I wanted to agree, to let her leave, so I didn't have to face the constant reminder of what she'd done. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if pushing her away would make things better or worse. Would it give me the clarity I needed, or would it just deepen the cracks between us? I hesitated, the words hard to form. Maybe some space would help. She nodded again, her eyes downcast. "I'll pack some things," as she stood up and walked toward our bedroom. I couldn't help but feel like I was watching our life together crumble in slow motion. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was packing a bag to leave, and I wasn't sure if she'd ever come back. I sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. How had we gotten here? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just a week ago, I'd thought we were fine, like any other couple, with the normal ups and downs of marriage. Now, It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if I wanted to jump or pull back. After what felt like an eternity, Ashley came back with a small suitcase. She paused at the doorway, her eyes searching mine. I don't want to leave, you know, she said quietly, but I understand if you need time. I couldn't respond. I didn't have the strength to tell her I needed her to go or that I wanted her to stay. So I just nodded, letting her walk out the door. The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed through the house, and for the first time, I was truly alone. The silence was deafening. All I could think about was the weight of what had just happened. The woman I had shared my life with had walked out, and I didn't know if she'd ever walk back in again. And the worst part, I didn't know if I wanted her to. The days after Ashley left were quiet. Too quiet. I thought space would help, but instead, it felt like a black hole had opened in the middle of my life, pulling everything into it. The silence was oppressive, and even though Kyle was with me, the absence of Ashley was constant. I kept telling myself that I needed this time, that I needed to clear my head and figure out what came next. But the truth was, I didn't feel any clearer. I just felt lost. Every time I looked at Kyle, I wondered how I was going to explain this to him, how I could ever make him understand what had happened. One night, I found myself sitting in front of the living room window, staring out into the dark street. It had been almost a week since Ashley had left, and we hadn't spoken since. She hadn't called, and I hadn't reached out either. It was as if we were both waiting, but for what, I didn't know. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ashley. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid the conversation I knew was coming. But another part of me knew that we couldn't avoid this forever. We had to face it, so I texted back, "Okay, come by tomorrow." The next day, I spent the whole morning feeling like I was bracing for impact. I didn't know what she was going to say. Would she ask for forgiveness? Would she want to come back? Or would this be the end? When she knocked on the door, I opened it to find her standing there, looking smaller than I remembered. She stepped inside, and for a moment, we just stood there in silence. Neither of us seemed to know how to start. Finally, she spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. We both took a seat on opposite ends of the couch, like we were strangers trying to navigate this new, broken version of our relationship. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I've ruined everything." I looked at her, waiting for the words that would follow. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I need to tell you that I'm sorry, not just for what I did with Jake, but for everything, for lying, for hiding it, for breaking your trust." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw her not as the person who had betrayed me, but as someone who was just as broken as I was. She looked lost, too, and it hit me that this wasn't just about me anymore. We were both standing in the ruins of something that had once been so strong. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said slowly, my voice quiet but firm. "But I'm willing to talk. We need to figure out where we go from here." Ashley nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I don't want to lose us." But deep down, I knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same again. We sat there in silence for a long time after Ashley's words hung in the air. I could see the regret in her eyes, the desperation for things to go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew they never could. Trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Ashley," I finally said, breaking the silence. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You lied, over and over." Her tears kept falling, but she didn't try to defend herself. She didn't have to. We both knew the weight of her actions. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I messed up. I know I destroyed everything. But I'll do anything to fix this. The old me, the one who loved her more than anything, would have jumped at those words. But that version of me felt distant now, like a ghost of someone I used to be. I wasn't sure if I could ever be that person again, not after what had happened. I don't know if there's anything left to fix, I said softly. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. Her face crumpled, and she started to sob, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. The distance between us felt too great, like a canyon we couldn't bridge. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the words that were about to come out of my mouth. I think we need to end this. Her sobs quieted, and she looked up at me, eyes wide. No, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can... But I shook my head, my chest tightening. Ashley, I don't think I can ever trust you again. I don't think we can rebuild what's been broken. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, but there was no arguing with the truth. We both knew it. I don't want Kyle to grow up in a house full of resentment, I continued. I don't want him to see us pretending, living a lie. He deserves better than that. She nodded slowly, the reality sinking in. But what about us? There is no us, I said, my voice breaking. Not anymore. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The finality of my words echoed between us. And in that moment, we both knew this was the end. The life we had built together, the love we had once shared, it was all gone. Ashley wiped her eyes, nodding as she stood up. She didn't say anything else, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say. As she walked to the door, she paused, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't respond. I just watched her walk out, knowing this was the last time she'd leave our home as my wife. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time, the silence felt like relief. It was over. Everything had changed, but at least now I had clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to move on, even if it meant moving on without her.